Bob Kaiser is associate editor and senior correspondent of the Washington Post. He is author of 7 books. The most recent of them, and the most relevant, is So Damn Much Money: The Triumph of Lobbying and the Corrosion of American Government, a remarkable indictment of the system that in so many ways brought the country to its knees, and that we're talking about how we can change. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers, and let me turn over the microphone.
You're going to spend today talking about an intriguing new phenomenon, one of the positive consequences of the internet. I work in a business which is an example of one of the negative consequences of the internet, but we won't go into that today. I too am fascinated by the potential that the new technology offers for reinvigorating American democracy and by mobilizing small donors and the masses. So I hope it isn't too much of a downer if I take these few minutes I've got here to tell you some of what I learned writing So Damn Much Money: The Triumph of Lobbying and the Corrosion of American Government, a book which I'm here to peddle mercilessly. This is a book about a culture. It's the culture of modern Washington. The Congresswoman just told you some important things about it, and I'll come back to that in a moment. This is the culture that reformers, including lots of the people in this room, are up against. The culture favors moneyed interests, fat cats. I wanted my book to be both interesting and fun to read, so I knew I had to have a narrative that held readers' interests. A good narrative is built around interesting characters and compelling anecdotes. I looked for a central character who could help carry the story, and I found a big-time Washington lobbyist named Gerald Cassidy. Cassidy has accumulated a personal fortune of well over $100 million in a 30-plus year career in lobbying in Washington. But in many respects, his story may seem to some of you unusual. Jerry Cassidy came to town not to be a fat cat, but to work for George McGovern on the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, the so-called Hunger Committee. If he was here this morning, he'd tell us that he was and is a liberal Democrat. I think of Cassidy as the Jay Gatsby of modern Washington, a self-invented man. He grew up in a poor, struggling, and booze-ridden family of Irish drunks in Brooklyn, sadly, and was always seen himself as an ally of the little guy. And he understands something about the culture of Washington that I think is centrally important. Cassidy was generous with his time with me. We spent hours together, just he and I and my tape recorder. One day I asked him if he agreed with me that the best off Americans, the wealthiest Americans, have really mastered the art of defending their economic status by cultivating power in Washington. Hadn't they ensured that the rich stayed rich while the ordinary people's incomes stagnated? And here's what he said, quote, "I refuse to argue with the obvious. It's true. How could you look at it and say it wasn't true? There has been a huge redistribution of income in this country, and you can't blame just the Republicans, because it has happened through Democratic presidencies and through Democratic and Republican Congresses. It's just true, largely because they, poorer citizens, have less representation. You look at the movements out there. There is no anti-hunger movement out there. There's no committee on the Hill looking into poverty." A quarter of a century earlier, 1982, Senator Bob Dole put it more simply and more bluntly. Poor people, Dole said, don't make campaign contributions. For a guy like me, in front of an audience like this, it's very tempting to tell you everything I learned about the money culture in Washington. But there's no way I can fit that into the 10 or 15 minutes available to me, so you'll just have to buy the book. I'm sorry. But I will say this. Any attempt to change the Washington culture will come up against one discomforting fact, and the Congresswoman is going to come up against it too. The culture is self-perpetuating, and few of its members so far have had the courage to challenge it and take it on. However, and this is the key point, you can only change the system by winning the support of the people who are in office, because They have mastered that system and made it work for them. Now, it's really interesting to hear her talking about what it's like to be a congressperson in this era and or to run for Congress. Her account, according to my reporting, is absolutely accurate. It's easy to find people like her who tell you how bad the system is, how much they hate doing it, how they'd love to concentrate on doing their real jobs instead of dialing for dollars, which is what they joke among themselves they're doing, as she described, when they leave the floor and go over to the Democratic or Republican campaign committees and make those telephone calls. But even in 2007, when the new Democratic majorities in both houses passed some really significant reforms to rein in the lobbying world in Washington that has become the biggest industry in town, no attempt was made to confront the fundraising monster. And as the Congresswoman suggested, it really is a monster. I discovered something in my reporting, she obviously knows all about it, that I am embarrassed to say, although I'd been at the Washington Post for 4 decades and grew up here, I had never really fully grasped, which was this new fundraising consulting industry. I met a nice guy named Mike Frioli, who runs a firm called Mike Frioli and Associates. He's a successful practitioner in this guild, and he told me how it works. Frioli's clients are liberal Democrats. He keeps his own computerized database, his own list in a computerized database of all the contributions made to candidates by individuals and institutions that seem to be friendly to the causes and the personalities that he represents. 30,000 entries in his database, he told me, as of last year. Frioli's job is to make up lists of people, and with their phone numbers, names of spouses to make it easy to talk on the telephone, and he gives these lists to the members and the aspirants who are his clients with instructions of how to make the calls and what to say and so on. His biggest challenge, he told me, is to get the scheduler in the campaign or in the congressional office to be sure that there's enough time to make these calls. I asked him to estimate how much time his clients spend on the telephone. He said the lucky ones spend only a day a week. The unlucky ones spend 2 days or more dialing for dollars. They're doing this, of course, on the time that you and I are paying them to be members of the House or Senate. And it's absolutely routine, as the Congresswoman just confirmed for us, for all of them to do it all the time. I don't have to tell this group. The graph line that describes the average cost of a winning campaign for the House or Senate rises inexorably upward. A shorthand that I used in the book, which seems to affect people that know less about these subjects than you do, pretty powerfully. In 1974, the average winning Senate campaign cost $450,000. In today's dollars, that's probably about 1.2. It is about 1.2. In 2008, the average winning campaign for the Senate, $10 million. But that's only part of the story. In middle-sized states, North Carolina, Oregon, Minnesota, the total spent on the Senate campaigns of 2008 exceeded $50 million. So damn much money. I'm not a total pessimist. One of my oldest friends in Washington is here with you today, Fred Wertheimer of Democracy 21. Fred has been thumping me for years, and he has persuaded me that the system can be cleaned up with difficulty. It's not inconceivable to me that this could happen. But I say one more time, to make it happen, to make meaningful reforms, the people who benefit most from the way things are, the members of today's House and Senate, have to be convinced to change the rules of the game. Thanks very much.